Anyone who knows anything about American history knows the importance of the date 1776. That's the date that the United States, the 13 united colonies, declared their independence from Great Britain. The colonies, when they were established under the rule of the King of England. They weren't under Parliament, they were ruled by the King. And over the years, because of the great distance between the colonies and England, while the king made rules and made laws, they were very laxly enforced. And so the colonists had it pretty well. They were able to govern themselves. Each colony had its own legislature and made their own laws, and things went pretty well. That is until 1760, when King George III became King of England. King George III started about the business of reversing the authority that had been granted to the Parliament and taking it back upon himself as the king. And he supported members of Parliament that wanted for that to happen. And he was determined to gain control of England over the Parliament and to keep a tight control on the colonies in the Americas. There were a couple of members of Parliament who were allies to the colonies and who were against King George III. One was William Pitt, and the other was Edmund Burke, and they were allies of our founding fathers like Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and George Washington. One of the first really grievous things that England did under the rule of King George III was in 1765 to pass the Stamp Act. The Stamp Act was a law that says every piece of paper or every document had to have a stamp on it that you bought from the government. And this was a way to raise money. If you had a legal document that you're going to file at the courthouse, you had to put a stamp on it from the government. If you were going to file a deed or a birth certificate or something like that at the courthouse, you had to put a government stamp on it, and you had to buy these stamps from the government. But it wasn't just legal documents. It was commercial documents as well. Even newspapers. If you printed a newspaper, you had to buy a stamp from the government and put it on there to show that you had paid. What it was is basically a tax on things that were produced by a printing press. Well, as you could imagine, the colonies didn't like this a bit. And they gathered together in New York, New York. The town so nice, they named it twice, by the way. They gathered in New York City on June 1765 to discuss the Stamp Act. That group that met together came to be known as the Stamp Act Congress. And what they concluded in their Stamp Act Congress was that all of their charters said they were ruled by the king, not by Parliament, and that Parliament couldn't make laws concerning the colonies. They also said that the colonies themselves had the right to make their own laws in their own legislatures. And because of that, since the colonists weren't represented in Parliament, all the way over there in London, that Parliament had no right to levy taxes. Only the local legislatures had right to levy taxes. Then in October of 17 1765. So this is only 11 years before the Revolution. The Stamp Act Congress issued a Declaration of Rights and Grievances. It protested the Stamp Act. It protested other British wrongs that they had visited upon the colonies. And evidently it worked. The Stamp Act was the very first time that the colonists had stood up to England and said, we think you're wrong. It's the first time they had aired their grievances, and Parliament eventually withdrew the Stamp Act. So that's a few things that have started to lead up to the Declaration of Independence, which will happen 11 years later. We're also going to discuss the First Continental Congress, but that will be for another video. Have a nice day.